Hello, everyone, and welcome to ESPN's wrap of the first private week of preseason testing in Barcelona. I'm Nate Saunders. Laurence Edmondson, as always, joins me. Laurence, we're not in studio today. We're doing it remotely from our homes. And the reason we're doing that is because, as we spoke about on Monday, this first test was completely private, completely behind closed doors, no media, no fans. Kudos to some people who, even by Friday, were flying helicopters over the circuit to try and get a glimpse of what was going on. We weren't close enough to Spain to be able to do that. Just quickly, before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what happened this week and what happened on Friday, what do you think of the private test? And do you think it's something that Formula One are going to do again? Because mixed reception would be an understatement about how people have found it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a helicopter budget at all, so we were unable to fly over the track. But it was a weird one. It was weird in a lot of senses because this was a great opportunity to tell the story, introduce fans to this new set of regulations, for fans, of course, to get a glimpse of the cars, whether they actually go there in person, but also through photographs and videos coming out. And then when journalists are on the ground, stories do emerge, and at least little loose ends of various things that happen, be it Isaac Hadjar's accident on the Tuesday in the wet, or the fastest lap times of the day, they can be followed up, and you can dig in a little bit deeper, analyze it a little bit more, go through the timings, figure out exactly what's going on. And we weren't able to do that. No one really, I think, was able to do that satisfactorily because the information just wasn't there, and no one could get close enough to get a full sight of it. I mean, it does mean that the next two tests in Bahrain, there's still going to be some interest around them. But I just feel like this was such a great opportunity for F1 to just start this season in the best possible way, in as public a possible way as possible. I mean, not everyone will tune into preseason testing, but it was a great opportunity for those that care enough to get closer to the sport. And I feel like F1 rather blocked that.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think the big fear, wasn't it, was that all these new cars were going to be breaking down left, right, and center. The teams weren't even going to be able to complete, a handful of laps a day just because of the issues. And these cars are so reliable now that, I don't think that's been an issue at all. So no, I would agree with you. But I mean, weirdly, the fact that we've had some running and we've been working the phones, as they used to say in the business, without people we know at teams this week, just kind of getting the information that we have been reporting. Gladly on that, given we're talking about stories that F1 could have told. A really good story from Friday, and we have to lead with it straight out of the gate, is this looked like a really, really encouraging day for Ferrari. Quickest session, quickest lap time of the week from Lewis Hamilton, a 1 minute 16.348. Now, headline times, you always have to caveat them at this stage. Very, very difficult to read too much into them. But a lot of laps between him and Charles Leclerc. I had the exact amount between them written down. 67 laps for Hamilton, 78 for Leclerc, and nearly 200 laps for Haas, who, of course, run a Ferrari engine. So given the fact that Ferrari last year spent a lot of time struggling with their reliability and stuff, they've finished with the second most laps, as we can see there, behind Mercedes, who we'll come on to later, and Haas second. So really, really strong from Ferrari. Good to see that they're able to kind of get down as well to some quick laps. Laurence, I think probably Ferrari and Aston Martin have been the two teams that have maybe had the most intrigue in the months leading into this regulation change. I think it'll be fair to say Ferrari because it's Ferrari, Aston Martin because of Adrian Newey. This seems like, from every metric that we have, and obviously the metrics are a lot lower at the moment, this seems like a really encouraging end to the shakedown for Ferrari, because we haven't seen any major issues. I think there was a video going around from the stands of Lewis spinning at one point, but spins in testing are nothing new. So yeah, it seems like a really, really encouraging end to the week for them, and we can kind of go to Bahrain, maybe getting on that same old Ferrari hype train that we've had in previous years.
Yeah, that's the danger, isn't it? Because and also proof of why you can't really read too much into testing in any way, because we've had this before where Ferrari have looked quite strong in preseason testing, and then it just hasn't emerged over the course of a season. But it was a good test. Let's look at what Ferrari said they were going to go to this test and do. They said they were going to go with a fairly basic, not fully developed version of their car, designed to put miles on it, to understand the power unit, and to get through a huge checklist that they will have with this brand new set of regulations and all the things that went with it. They seem to achieve those goals, and the drivers, talking over the week, seem to suggest that they were on target, and then by the end of the week completing the targets that they had set out. So that's what they went there to do, and that's what they did. But I think that's as much as we can take from any team really at this stage, because the lap times, even in testing normally, trying to compare one lap time with another is a bit of a fool's errand. You have different tire compounds, you have different fuel loads, you have different times of day that all of that was set. Now, usually we can start to piece some of those together, tire compounds, time of day, because we're there watching the cars on track. And also start to add performance to these cars. Certainly in the case of Ferrari, they've made very clear that the car they ran in Barcelona will be quite different to the car that lines up on the grid in Melbourne, because extra performance will be added to it. Extra development that they left a little bit later will come to that car through the Bahrain test and into Australia. So that's why whether Lewis set the fastest lap on the final day or not means practically nothing at this stage. But the fact that they were able to go out and put laps on the car, they didn't appear to have any complete disasters with reliability or any single issue happening over and over again, suggests that they're in a solid place from there. But I don't think we can say much more than that, as frustrating as that is.
No, I agree. I agree completely. I mean, headline times are called that for that exact reason, aren't they? They're the things that stand out the most. For, like, as it says there, Ferrari quickest in Barcelona. That is a fact. But I think you're right. It's at this point, it's way too early to be saying anything. We know, a lot of people have been talking about the Mercedes. They've looked very, very strong. Just the way they were able to kind of just straight out of the box, almost just be putting laps down, good mileage. They didn't run on Friday, so it'd be interesting to see how their lap times would have stacked up if you are starting to play that game of looking at, like for like test times. But like you say, unless they're set at the same time of day with the tires, we'll be able to watch that a bit more closely in Bahrain. Another team that has caught a lot of people's attention so far, and I mean, again, this talks about how you can't really read a huge amount into testing. You flip Friday's order around, and one of the names further down there probably has a lot of intrigue around is Fernando Alonso. The Aston Martin project brought in Adrian Newey, have brought in that Honda Power unit. They've built that incredible facility in just opposite the Silverstone circuit. Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, saying these regulations are when they want to win a world championship. 4 laps they did on Thursday. They started late, so they missed one of their 3 days they could have had. Right at the bottom of the mileage counter of teams that were in Barcelona, and then spent a lot of Friday, it seems, running. Weirdly, people were pointing out on social media that they had a blue light flashing behind their car. I was told that was because it's basically a warning to other cars approaching the Aston Martin. Look, we're not driving at full speed down the straights. We're running lower engine modes. Basically, be careful as you approach. And that, again, Lawrence, to your point, there's so many things these teams are running at this point. They've got 6 days of testing in the desert to come in Bahrain, which I think will just give a much better indication across the board of how these teams are doing. But yeah, Aston, I mean, it was good to see them out, first of all. I was really worried at one point when we got that statement from them saying our intention is to run Thursday and Friday. It sounded very much like they were covering their backs to not run at all. So we've seen about 60, well, I think I said 65 laps overall. Obviously, we're not going to see any performance runs from them. A lot of people are already saying, is Fernando having deja vu? He obviously had a very painful first test with Honda, with McLaren in 2015. I don't think it was as bad as that. It doesn't sound like there were major problems. It just sounds like they're just a bit behind on things. Do you think Aston Martin, I mean, the fact they started late, the fact they had so few laps, is that alarming? Is it do you think a team like Aston Martin should have done better, or is the fact that they've actually arrived, unlike a team like Williams, which clearly is up against it, and have actually managed to put some laps down, maybe mitigate some of the pain they might have in Bahrain doing some of this stuff they would have otherwise been doing on day one? In the middle of Feb.
Well, the thing that Aston Martin fans will be holding on to is that this is the first car that has been designed under Adrian Newey's leadership, technical leadership, and now as team principal at that team. And there'll be this hope that even though it arrived late, we know how much in the past Newey has pushed the limits in terms of, getting as much time in the wind tunnel as possible before committing to a final design and before sending that into production. And it does seem that that has resulted in the car arriving a bit later than ideally they would have wanted. Of course, they would have wanted their full 3 days of testing. In reality, they had 1 full day and basically an hour to do some shakedown laps on Thursday. Not ideal, but I think at this stage, there's still enough time. There's still those 2 tests to turn it around. And you've also got to look at the project that Aston Martin has taken on this year. Yes, they have this amazing facility in Silverstone and this brand new wind tunnel. And it does seem like they have everything that they should need now to go and win championships and challenge for championships. But they've also got the challenge of bringing the new Honda power unit into the car. Of course, Honda used to supply Red Bull, but actually they decided at one stage around 2020, 2021 that they were going to leave F1. They then decided around 2023 that they were going to come back to F1, and they missed out on a little bit of the early development time that other manufacturers had. So perhaps we shouldn't be that surprised if Honda is a little bit on the back foot starting this set of regulations. And then also, for the first time, in my memory at least, Aston Martin making their own gearbox as well, which is, a huge undertaking, because previously they relied on the Mercedes engine gearbox package. Now, by going with Honda and going their own way and doing their own thing, they've got to produce their own gearbox, and that will create a huge amount of opportunities and great opportunities for Adrian Newey to work his magic, and the design team there to work their magic on taking completely different avenues of development, which it looks already like they may have done with some parts of the car. But equally, it's going to come with huge challenges. And I think, the fact that they were a little bit later just underlines the size of the challenge they face to get on the grid. I mean, you could then look at, say, well, Cadillac and Audi managed to do it. Audi with a brand new power unit and building their own gearboxes, and Cadillac with a team that was only really signed off about 320 odd days ago. But, each team has different ways of approaching it. And while Audi and Cadillac seem to very much focus on getting the car on track as early as possible and completing the mileage, it looks like Aston Martin have been very aggressive with development to try and bring as developed a car as possible to this early stage of testing.
Which, of course, has always been a hallmark of Adrian Newey's, hasn't it? When he was at Red Bull, it was quite famous. They would turn up for the first test, they'd turn up to test 2, and it'd be a different car. They'd been, just developing the hell out of it back at the factory. I mean, for me, the two teams that I'm really fascinated by this year are Ferrari and Aston Martin. Lots of pressure for different reasons. And yeah, just interesting to follow how they've done so far. Just a quick shout. We spoke about Mercedes, McLaren, the reigning world champions. They got out there today, had a very productive day again. A lot of laps, over 100 laps for them. They've just kind of quietly gone about their business, haven't they, McLaren? They haven't really done anything either way that's, like, oh my God, super impressive, or they've had a super worrying day. Just very, very solid, got down to it. And I think most people assume if the Mercedes is quick, McLaren you would expect to be right there in the mix as well, just because of the success of the last couple of seasons. What else has caught your eye this week? I mean, there's a lot of teams that have been involved. Has anyone jumped out at you? There's one that I was going to bring up, but I don't know whether you wanted to bring them up. Another team that's built their own engine this year in Red Bull. They've kind of been quietly going under the radar as well. But anything stood out to you so far?
I think we're slowly ticking off all teams. Of course, there's the Williams situation, which we talked about on Monday, not bringing a car at all, and focusing on making the Bahrain test now. But Red Bull is one I think we should focus on, because they had a strange test in that they actually went to do the first 2 consecutive days, which was very impressive. Again, as you say, they've got a brand new power unit, a brand new operation that was built from the ground up from like 2022 onwards. So to be able to get that power unit lapping reliably across 2 teams, of course, Racing Bulls also have that same Red Bull power unit, was impressive. And I think, again, it's too early to look into the times. But another thing that was particularly impressive from that Red Bull operation this week was that Hadjar crashed on the Tuesday in the wet. That's not the impressive bit. That's the unfortunate bit. But then after that, the team, they weren't entirely sure whether they'd be able to basically produce enough spares and produce the parts needed to get the car back out. And then they missed the next 2 days on Wednesday and Thursday, but then got the car back out on Friday so that Max Verstappen could get a full day in it. They didn't seem to go for the headline lap times that Mercedes managed to get and Ferrari managed to get. But then each team has a completely different way of approaching this test. And it may just be that they had a whole bunch of other things, especially with that, brand new power unit from the ground up coming in, and, a whole new power unit team around it as well. They maybe just had a bunch of things that they really needed to get sorted in this test, because again, the more valuable performance running as well is likely to be in Bahrain, because fingers crossed, at least it's going to be warmer in Bahrain, close to the kind of temperatures these cars normally run at. And therefore, in terms of what you're doing with the tires and in terms of cooling setups and so on, if you're looking at pushing the envelope of performance, you may as well do it in Bahrain rather than Barcelona. So again, yeah, I think to your point, just the fact that Red Bull managed to get that power unit running reliably is just a massive win at this stage, and it's too early really to be saying too much more else about where they're going to stack up.
Yeah, and everyone I've spoken to at Red Bull so far seems, almost kind of like they were very much keeping expectations in check. I think they were worried that maybe they would have a bit of pain early on, but yeah, other than that agile moment, it really has been quite strong for them. I think that is the biggest question for me that you kind of alluded to there, that I think will really dictate the Bahrain test more than anything else. I do think that Mercedes does seem to just be in the strongest position in terms of how strong their overall package seems to be. But what we don't know yet, and what Bahrain should tell us, is the gaps between the front and the second team, and then just the gaps across the field. We've just talked about 4 very strong operations there in all the Mercedes teams, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and then Red Bull as well. That's kind of the old big 4, and then you're putting Aston Martin in there as well, which I think is the absolute bare minimum for them this season. I think the big question is going to be, how spread are those 5 teams going to be? How spread are those teams going to be? Is Alpine going to join that mix, with the Mercedes engine early on, for example? And that really is what Bahrain is going to teach us. Previously, regulation changes on the engine side, if you look to 2014, there were massive gaps between the Mercedes, the Ferrari, the Renault. That kind of punctuated the first couple of seasons at least. I think Formula One is hoping that there'll be a much, much smaller gap between, obviously, within these regulations. We won't get too much into it, but there are mechanisms now to help teams and manufacturers catch up, down the line if they need to. But I think that's really going to be what comes out of Bahrain. For me, it seems like if I was putting my money anywhere right now, I'd still feel the most confident putting it on a Mercedes to maybe be on pole position in Australia. If I was, rolling the dice and making a wild guess now, but we just don't know on performance. Is Ferrari going to be right in the mix? Is Ferrari going to edge ahead in Bahrain? Is one of the other teams going to do that? And I think that's one of the good things about these regulations so far, is that we don't have a situation, it seems, where one team is wildly out in front of the rest, and then the rest is playing catch up. Because as fun as 2014 was, with Hamilton and Rosberg fighting each other for the championship, if those 2 teammates hadn't been competitive against each other, it would have been a terrible season. So I think ultimately that's the big fear for Formula One is can they avoid doing that? Early indications, again, we're basing it on very small metrics, seems to be that we might get a big wide open season. And yeah, I mean, that's my thought going to Bahrain as well. It like you say, it's impossible to really read into who's going to be the outright quickest team. But I do have a bit of 2014 vibes about the Mercedes, just in terms of the way they went about testing, the kind of the grin that George Russell couldn't keep off his face when he's been talking to the cameras. But then a lot of the drivers just look happy to be back driving. And on top of that, I think that the other big question I want to see addressed in Bahrain as well is, are these drivers actually enjoying driving these new cars? That's been a big thing about this regulation change, hasn't it? A lot more interaction with the pit wall. The interviews being quite controlled by teams this week has meant we haven't really had the chance to ask the difficult questions to the drivers of, well, are these cars better to drive? There's a lot riding on that. If Max Verstappen has kind of hinted that if he doesn't like these cars, he wouldn't really have an issue walking away at some point in the near future. So all of that said, Lawrence, it's still a murky picture going to Bahrain. You'll be at test 1 in Bahrain. I'll be in test 2. Going on what we have so far, would you be willing to kind of pin the preseason favorites tag on Mercedes at this point? Or is it still in your mind kind of too murky a picture, too difficult a picture to make sense of at this point?
Well, going into this shakedown, even then, there was this assumption that Mercedes were going to be leading the field, because just the readiness that they went into 2014, the stories around what they were doing with their power unit, there was this kind of assumption that they were the team to beat. I saw nothing in this shakedown that made me think that they were in trouble, or that perhaps wasn't true. But there's enough there to just show us that we actually know very little at this stage, just because the lap count, it was ahead of Ferrari, but it wasn't miles ahead of Ferrari. The lap times were kind of in a ballpark where there wasn't a huge amount in it, certainly enough to have variables that could shift it massively one way or massively the other. So I'd say at the moment, there's nothing that we've seen that suggests that Mercedes isn't still the favorite going into this set of tests and into the first race. But it could all just switch around so quickly over the 2 Bahrain tests, and then of course in Melbourne as well. What's more, the way F1's set up now is that there really has been this effort to try and make it so that if one team is dominating and one team does have a huge lead, both in terms of power unit and in terms of chassis and aero development time, the mechanisms in place to allow the others to catch up. So right now, yeah, my money would still be on Mercedes, but it is not a safe bet by any stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, to be honest with you, that's the biggest win that Formula One could have had this week, is that we're not going from this private test thinking, oh, well, okay, this is just going to be a matter of how many races Mercedes win. Do seem very strong. But yeah, it was great to see Ferrari throwing some laps in there. And yeah, just I think a lot of things to focus on, over the next 2 weeks of testing. And like you say, such a long season, and we've seen, seasons fluctuate and change. I'm actually, give Formula One its credit. The fact we haven't fully been able to massively microanalyze this test has raised the anticipation a little bit, because there's a lot of things we don't know, and I think sometimes not knowing things is, a good thing for fans and media, especially when we have 6 days of testing coming up. Laurence, as always, thank you very much, mate. We'll be talking more about the preseason build up to the Australian Grand Prix. As we mentioned, 2 tests to come in Bahrain, and yeah, a lot of attention and focus on these new cars and who will be the car to beat in Melbourne. Keep it with us here, and hopefully we'll have a better understanding in a few weeks of who that will be.